Welcome to Talk Treatises.
It's great to be here.
Today, we are opening a file that, I have to admit, it looks like a massive contradiction on the surface. We're looking at a text that is, for all intents and purposes, a rigorous mathematics textbook.
Oh, absolutely. It's filled with diagrams, algebraic formulas, subscripts, rules for validity. It's dense stuff.
And this is the hook. This is what really drags you in. It was written by the man who invented the Mad Hatter.
And the Cheshire Cat, the Queen of Hearts. It's a fascinating, almost jarring collision of worlds.
It really is. We are analyzing Lewis Carroll's Symbolic Logic, Part 1, which he published back in 1896.
And usually when you bring up Carroll, the conversation immediately goes to Alice in Wonderland, right?
Of course. You're looking for the hidden meanings, the political satire, the Freudian slips in, all the nonsense.
But this book, it's the total inverse of that. Yeah. This isn't Lewis Carroll, the storyteller. This is Charles Lutwidge Dodgson, the real man behind the pen name, stepping out from behind the curtain.
The Oxford mathematician.
The mathematician and logician at Christ Church, Oxford. And this book was his life's passion, really. It was his attempt to take the messy, chaotic way that we all argue and force it into a structure as precise as a game of chess.
That's the perfect analogy, and it's actually one he uses himself. He didn't see logic as this dry, dusty academic chore, which is frankly how most of us see it.
I think that's fair to say.
He saw it as mental recreation. And that phrase, that's really the thesis statement for this entire deep dive, isn't it?
It is. Carroll's core belief was that if you could gamify reason, if you could turn the act of thinking into a kind of sport with a clear board, with rules, with playing pieces, you could give anyone the power to dismantle the flimsy, illogical arguments that plague our politics, our newspapers, our everyday lives.
He wanted to gamify philosophy a full century before gamification was even a word. So our mission today is to actually learn the rules of this game. We aren't just going to talk about the book.
No, we're going to get our hands dirty.
We're going to learn the system he built. We'll look at his diagrams, his counters, and his outright war against the academic establishment of his time.
And hopefully by the end of this, you should be able to look at a logical proposition, whether it's in a social media post, a political speech, an advertisement, and you'll be able to mentally place it on Carroll's board and see if it holds up.
Or if it's just, nonsense dressed up as wisdom.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's set the stage. It's 1896. We're in late Victorian England. Why did Dodgson feel this was so necessary? I mean, was the state of logic really that bad?
It wasn't necessarily bad, but it was inaccessible. That was the real problem.
Yeah.
If you were a student at Oxford in the 1890s and you decided to study logic, you were going to be slogging through classical Aristotelian formalism.
And what does that actually mean for someone not in that world?
It means a lot of rote memorization. You had to memorize all these valid forms of syllogisms, and they had these bizarre names like Barbara, Celerant, Dari.
Barbara? Like the name?
Yes. They were mnemonics. The vowels in the names A, E, I, O corresponded to specific types of propositions, like universal affirmatives or particular negatives.
That sounds like learning a language by just memorizing the dictionary instead of, learning how to actually speak it.
It might have been worse than that. It was so abstract, so disconnected from how people actually think and argue. It was, to use Carroll's own words, a cumbrous process.
Cumbrous, I like that.
He felt that the existing textbooks were almost terrified of making things simple. They were written by academics, for academics, and the goal felt like it was to keep the circle small,
Keep it exclusive.
Right. And Carroll wanted to do the opposite. He wanted to democratize it. He specifically stated that he wanted to create a system that was accessible to an intelligent child of 12 or 14.
That is a very, very specific target audience. A smart middle schooler.
It is. But, and this is key, he didn't want to dumb it down. He didn't want to dilute the rigor. If anything, he wanted to make it more rigorous by making it visual. He had this deep conviction that if you could see the logic, you wouldn't need to memorize the Latin names of the syllogisms.
You just see the pattern.
You just see it. It would be intuitive.
There's a warning in the preface of the book that I think really sets the tone for this whole endeavor. He treats the reader like a student who's just walked into a dojo for the first time.
He does, doesn't he? He's incredibly polite, but also very, very firm about how you are allowed to approach his work.
He warns against dipping.
Yes. Do not dip into this book.
And he compares it to reading a novel. He says, when you read a novel, you might be tempted to flip to the last page to see if the lovers get married.
Or if the villain gets caught.
Right. And in fiction, the penalty for that is, What? You just spoiled the surprise for yourself. But Carroll argues that in a treatise on logic, dipping leads to sheer insanity.
Chuckles. Strong words for a math textbook.
Very strong. But he's right, isn't he?
Oh, he's completely right. Logic is a chain. Every link depends on the one before it. If you skip the chapter where he defines the universe of discourse, you're not going to understand dichotomy. And if you don't get dichotomy, the diagrams he builds will just look like, well, gibberish.
He tells you flat out, you must master the land conquered before you take a single step forward.
You can't build the second floor of a house if the foundation is still wet cement. It's the same principle.
He also makes this fascinating distinction between his mental recreation and physical games, like cricket. I found this part really insightful.
Me too.
He says, when you play a game of cricket, you walk away with
What?
the memory of the game, maybe some health benefits.
Maybe a bruise or two.
A bruise or two, yeah. But when you play the game of logic, he says, you walk away with a result.
A tangible result. You leave with clarity. You've acquired a permanent conquest over a piece of mental landscape. You now possess the ability to detect error.
He's not selling logic as a subject to learn. He's selling it as a superpower to be acquired.
A permanent upgrade to your mental operating system. That's a perfect way to put it.
So let's try to acquire it. Let's build that foundation. The very first concept he introduces is the universe of discourse. Now, to a modern ear, that sounds... well, it sounds like something from theoretical physics or maybe a Marvel movie.
The universe of discourse. It sounds very grand.
It does. But in 1896 logic, it meant something very specific and quite simple, right?
It's a humble concept with a grand name. The universe of discourse, or UNIV, as he abbreviates it, is simply the set of all the things we are currently talking about. That's it. It's the boundary condition for our conversation.
Okay, give us a practical example of how that works.
Well, if we're having a debate about an upcoming election, our universe of discourse might be politicians. If that's our universe, then for the duration of this argument, we are ignoring ducks, clouds, antique furniture, sandwiches.
They don't exist in our conversation.
They are outside the boundary. We are only looking at the set of politicians. Or if we're discussing a farm, the unit could be animals. Or, to be more specific, it could be ducks in a village. The point is, you define it.
It seems almost obvious, but why is defining this the absolute first step? Why can't we just jump in and start arguing?
Because if you and I are operating in different universes of discourse, we can't have a logical argument. We're literally speaking different languages.
Yeah.
If I say all banks are corrupt, and I'm talking about financial institutions,
And I'm thinking of riverbanks.
we are just talking past each other, Carroll demands that we set the boundary first. It stops the goalposts from being moved halfway through the argument.
Yeah. So once we have our universe, let's use his example. Let's say the universe is books. He introduces this concept of dichotomy.
This is the engine of the whole system. You take your universe and you use dichotomy like a knife. You slice it into two, and only two, clean halves. You have 6 ballers and nadas. Or, as he writes it, 6 ballers in.
So if our universe is books and we define $6 as old books,
Then 6 occurs as everything else in that universe. It's not old books.
which means new books.
Or newer books, yes. And crucially, there is no middle ground. There's no third option.
But that's the thing. In the real world, old is totally subjective. Is a book from 2010 old? Is a classic from the 1800s old? There's so much gray area.
And logic doesn't care about the gray area.
Right.
That's the key innovation here. In Carroll's game, you, the logician, define the line. You decide what old means for this argument. And once that line is drawn, everything in the universe must fall on one side or the other. This binary cleavage of reality, this division into 6 galls and not a nose, drives his entire system.
It's like binary code before we really had binary code. It's just 1 and 0, yes and no.
Precisely. He saw the entire universe as a class that could be divided. And this idea of division leads us directly to the board game part of this. He literally creates a game board.
Which is important because most people, when they think of visualizing logic, they think of Venn diagrams, the overlapping circles.
Right. You got a circle for A, a circle for B, and that little football-shaped wedge in the middle where they overlap.
An image which Carroll absolutely detested.
He couldn't stand them.
But why? They seem so intuitive. We teach them in elementary school.
They are intuitive for very simple problems. If you have 2 circles, say cats and black things, the overlap for black cats is easy to see. But what happens if you add a third variable? Fluffy things.
Okay, you can draw a third circle overlapping the other 2. It gets a little messy, but it's doable.
Now add a fourth. and a fifth.
Yeah.
What if you have 10 variables? Have you ever tried to draw 5 overlapping circles where every single possible intersection is clearly represented?
It looks like a spirograph that's had a nervous breakdown. It's just a complete mess of lines and tiny, unusable slivers.
It's a visual mess. Exactly. You lose the ability to track the logic because the shapes become irregular and impossible to read. So Carroll threw out the circles entirely and replaced them with rectilinear boxes. It's a tiling system.
Okay, walk us through this. I want you, the listener, to really picture this mental board because this is the main tool we're going to be using.
All right, imagine a square, just a simple empty box. That square is your universe of discourse.
Okay, got it. A square.
Now, draw a horizontal line right through the middle. You've just divided your universe into a north half and a south half.
North and south, simple enough.
The north half is assigned to your first variable, $6. Let's stick with our books universe. So the north half is old books.
Which means the south half must be $6 new books.
Exactly. Old up top, new down bottom. Now, draw a vertical line down the center of the square. You've just split it again into a west half and an east half.
Okay.
The west half is assigned to your second variable. Let's say it's English books. That makes the east half foreign books.
So now the board is a grid of 4 smaller squares.
Precisely. This is what he calls the bilateral diagram. And now you can map every possibility. Let's look at the top left square, the northwest quadrant.
That's in the north half, so it's an old book. And it's in the west half, so it's an English book. So old English books.
Perfect. And northeast?
Old foreign books.
Southwest?
New English books. And southeast must be new foreign books.
You've got it. It's a matrix. It covers every single possibility. If a book exists in this universe, it has to live in one of those 4 boxes. There's nowhere else for it to go.
And this is where he leaves Venn diagrams in the dust, because it's expandable.
Infinitely expandable, in theory. To add a third variable, let's call it banal for bound in leather, he doesn't try to draw some messy third shape. He just draws an inner square inside the main square.
Like a picture frame inside the box.
Exactly like a picture frame. The interior of that frame, the inner square, represents polar dollars, things that are bound in leather. The border area, the frame itself, represents dollars, things that are not bound in leather.
Oh, that's clever. So now every one of those original 4 quadrants is subdivided into an inner and an outer part.
Correct. So now you have a northwest inner cell, which is old, English, and bound in leather. And you have the northwest outer cell, which is old, English, and not bound in leather.
Giving us a total of 8 distinct compartments for every possibility.
8 compartments. And you can keep going. He actually designed diagrams for problems with up to 10 variables, which creates this incredibly complex lattice of squares within squares. But the genius of it is that the topology, the layout, it always stays clean and rectilinear. You always know exactly which cell represents old English leather-bound, written by a woman. That is also boring.
There's a specific address for that exact book.
A specific, unique address.
Okay, so we have the board. It's our map of reality. Now we need the pieces to actually play the game. He calls them counters.
This is where the game part becomes absolutely literal. He uses 2 types of counters, and the color coding is, again, perfectly binary. He has red counters and gray counters.
Now, in modern design, red usually means stop or error or danger, but Carroll uses it very differently here.
He does. You have to flip that in your mind. For Carroll, red signifies presence. It means life. It means existence. If you place a red counter into a cell on the board, you are making a powerful assertion. You're saying, there is at least one thing here.
So if I take a red counter and I put it in that northwest cell.
You are stating as a fact that some old English books exist. You are claiming that set is not empty. You are, in a way, breathing life into that category.
And the gray counter is the opposite.
The gray counter signifies absence, emptiness, nullity. A gray counter means this compartment is empty. Nothing is here. If you place a gray counter in that same northwest cell, you are asserting no old English books exist. You've effectively wiped that category out of your reality.
It's a bit godlike, isn't it? You're just toggling existence on and off with these little colored chips.
It is, and this simple binary system, red for something, gray for nothing, allows you to map almost any simple logical statement. But there's a third state, which for me is the most brilliant part of the whole system.
The state of, I don't know.
The state of ambiguity. He calls it sitting on the fence.
The fence! I love this.
Carroll acknowledges that most of the time we have partial information. So suppose you are told the proposition, some old books are bound in leather. You know, there are some 6 of lies. that are also leather.
Okay, so I need to put a red counter on the board somewhere. It has to be in the north half because they're old. And it has to be in the inner square because they're leather bound.
Right. But where exactly? Yeah. Do you put it in the northwest inner cell, assuming they're English, or the northeast inner cell, assuming they're foreign?
The proposition doesn't say. It doesn't tell me the language of the book. So if I put it in the west, I'm adding information. I'm just assuming they're English. And I put it in the east, I'm assuming they're foreign. I can't do either one.
So where did the token go?
You put it right on the line. You put it on the fence.
Exactly. You place the red counter literally on the vertical line that divides the west half from the east half.
That is just brilliant. It visually represents ambiguity. The counter sitting on the line says, the truth exists somewhere in one of these two adjacent rooms, but I lack the data to know which one.
It forces the logician to be honest about the limits of their knowledge. You are not allowed to claim more precision than your premises give you. It's a visual reminder of what you don't know.
Okay, so this is the visual game, but eventually drawing boxes for every problem gets a bit slow. So Carroll develops a shorthand, the method of subscripts.
This is the code behind the matrix. He translates the visual information from the counters into a sleek algebraic notation. And it's shockingly close to what we now call Boolean algebra, which is, the logic that drives all of computer science.
How does the notation work?
It's very simple. He uses the subscript 1 to represent a red counter, to represent existence. So if you write 6 by L1, that just means some x exist. It implies an entity is present.
And for the gray counter, for absent?
He uses the subscript 0. So $6 means no x exist. It implies nullity or an empty set.
So if I wanted to write no old books exist, I would just write $6.
Correct. And then he combines them, and this is where it gets really powerful. If you write $6 the allers, that means the intersection of x and y is empty.
No old English books exist.
Exactly. And $6 means the intersection is occupied. Some old English books exist.
And he also has symbols for the logical operators themselves, for and implies.
He does. He uses a dagger symbol, like a little cross, dagger to mean and he uses the paragraph symbol, dillers, to mean would, if true, prove. So you can write a whole complex argument as a single equation. You can write something like 6 mao dagger, I am thou t gars y vor.
Which translates to what?
It translates to no x are mam and d are, if true, prove that no x are y. Now, whether that's a valid syllogism or a fallacy is what the whole game is about figuring out. But the point is, he turned long, ambiguous English sentences into clean, testable formulas. He stripped the language of its baggage.
And that ambiguity, that baggage, that's really what he was fighting against, wasn't it? This brings us to his war with the logicians. He keeps taking these little snipes at them throughout the book. He always capitalizes it. The logicians, like they're a rival football team or a street gang.
Chuckles. To him, they were worse than rivals. They were purveyors of confusion. And the central conflict, the biggest battle in this war, was over a concept called existential import.
Okay, that sounds deeply philosophical.
It is probably the most important concept in the entire book. And it all comes down to a simple question. When we make a statement about a group of things, are we automatically claiming that that group of things actually exists?
Let's break this down with the 3 key words of logic: some, no, and all.
Good idea. Let's start with some. If I say to you, some apples in this basket are red, am I claiming that apples actually exist in this basket?
Yes, obviously. If the basket is empty and I say some apples are red, I'm lying. The word some requires there to be, well, some.
Carroll is 100% on your side. He asserts that any proposition starting with some, like some x or y, places a red counter on the board. It asserts existence. That is his first axiom.
Okay, that one seems like common sense. What about no? Let's say no unicorns are green.
Right. Does that statement imply that unicorns exist?
No, not at all. In fact, it kind of suggests the opposite. It's just looking at the category green unicorns and saying, nope, this box is empty.
Precisely. Carroll argues that no x or y asserts absolutely nothing about the existence of x itself. It is purely a statement of separation. It says, I have checked the compartment marked green unicorns and I can confirm it is empty. But that compartment being empty doesn't tell us if there are any blue unicorns next door or pink unicorns, or if there are no unicorns at all. No is compatible with total non-existence.
Okay, so some implies existence, no does not. Now we get to the big one, the controversial one, all.
This is the battlefield. All x or y as in all men are mortal, or all unicorns have horns.
Now, the standard logicians of his day, and actually most modern symbolic logic still works this way, they treat all as a conditional statement.
Correct. In modern logic, all x or y essentially translates to, if a thing is an X, then it is also a Y. It makes no commitment as to whether any X's actually exist in the first place.
So in modern logic, I can truthfully say all Martian cities are paved with gold.
Yes, you can. And it's considered a true statement.
But how? There are no Martian cities.
Exactly. It's what logicians call a vacuously true statement. Since you cannot find a single Martian city that is not paved with gold, because you can't find any Martian cities at all, the statement cannot be proven false. Therefore, it stands as true.
Carroll must have hated that.
He found it repugnant to common sense. He argued that when a normal human being, a non-logician, says all, they are implying that the thing they're talking about is real. You don't talk about all of something that doesn't exist.
So what was his definition of all? How did he fix it?
He defined all X or Y as a double proposition. He said it was actually two hidden statements rolled into one. The first statement is some X or Y, which, as we know, asserts existence.
It plants the red counter.
It plants the red counter. And the second statement is no X or not Y, which puts a gray counter in the other half of the X space, asserting separation.
So because his all secretly contains a sum, it forces existence into the equation.
Yes. For Lewis Carroll, you are not allowed to say all Martian cities are paved with gold unless you are first willing and able to prove that Martian cities actually exist. If the subject of your all statement is an empty set, your statement is simply false. Period.
He uses this fantastic thought experiment to prove why the logicians were wrong about this. The schoolboy analogy.
Oh, it's just delightful. It's pure Carroll. He asks you to imagine a school with very specific rules. There's a first class, a second class, and so on. But at this particular moment in time, there are no boys enrolled in the first class.
So the first class is currently an empty set.
Correct. Now, one of the school rules is all boys in the first class get prizes. According to the logicians, since there are no boys in the first class, that rule is vacuously true.
Okay, that's their position.
But then Carroll springs the trap. He says, okay, if you accept that, then you also have to accept that the opposite is true. You could have another rule that says all boys in the first class do not get prizes.
And that would also be true.
By their logic, yes. It's also vacuously true because you can't find a boy in the first class who is getting a prize to disprove it.
Yeah.
So now you have a situation where two directly contradictory statements, all of them get prizes and none of them get prizes, are simultaneously true.
Which is an absurdity, a paradox.
Carroll just says that's nonsense.
Yeah.
In the real world, you cannot have two contradictory universals be true at the same time. Therefore, the logician's definition of all must be fundamentally broken. He wanted logic to map onto reality as people experience it, not just onto abstract syntax.
And this insistence on practical reality, it also flows into his defense of the negative copula, right?
Yes. The logicians of his day were a bit afraid of negative attributes. They didn't like defining things by what they were not. They felt that a class like not man or not good was just too big and unwieldy to be logically useful.
I mean, to be fair, not man includes everything else in the universe. It's ducks, stars, ideas, emotions, sandwiches. It's a very long list.
It is an enormous list. But Carroll's point was, just because a class is large doesn't make it useless. He gives this wonderful, very human example of dividing the world into men I would like to be seen with and men I would not like to be seen with.
I suspect for most of us, the not list is significantly longer.
For most of us, certainly. But it's a perfectly valid and useful category, isn't it? Carroll refused to treat negative attributes like six balls as second-class citizens. In his system, not aches is just as real, just as valid, and just as manipulatable as six balls.
Which is actually a very modern way of thinking. In computer science, the NOT gate is one of the fundamental building blocks. You can't build a processor without it.
He was way ahead of his time on that.
Okay, so let's move on to the actual machinery of argumentation. We've built the board, we've defined our terms, we've picked a side in the war with the logicians. Now we have to actually argue. Syllogisms.
The meat and potatoes of logic. Two premises, and if you're lucky, one conclusion.
But Carroll gives us some new vocabulary here that I found incredibly helpful for visualizing what an argument actually does. He talks about eliminins and retinins.
It's such a useful distinction. In any standard syllogism, you have a term that acts as the bridge between the two premises. The classic example, all men are mortal, Socrates is a man.
The term man appears in both premises. It's the connector. It connects Socrates to the concept of mortality.
Right, and then what happens in the conclusion? Socrates is mortal, the word man is gone.
It's been eliminated.
It has been eliminated.
Yeah.
So man is the eliminand. Its only job is to facilitate the logical transaction and then vanish. The terms that are left behind, Socrates and mortal, are the retenens. They're retained in the final conclusion.
So a logical argument is basically a process of evaporation. You mix two ingredients, you apply the heat of logic, the middle part evaporates away, and you're left with a concentrated truth.
That is a great way to put it. And a fallacy is what happens when the evaporation process fails. If your eliminans don't match up properly, if you can't build that bridge, then you get no conclusion. Or, as Carroll puts it in his very precise way, you get a fallacy of, like, eliminans not asserted to exist.
Which leads us from the simple syllogism to the sorites, the heat.
But what sorites is just a syllogism on steroids. It's a chain reaction. Instead of just two premises, you might have 3 or 5 or 50. Premise A leads to B, which leads to C, which leads to D, and so on.
It's like a row of dominoes toppling over.
Exactly. And historically, these were a nightmare to solve. You had to track the entire chain in your head, which is incredibly difficult and prone to error. Carroll looked at this and, like a good mathematician, said, we can automate this. We can create an algorithm. He invented the method of underscoring.
This was the part that felt like doing a Sudoku puzzle. It was strangely satisfying.
It is an algorithm. You write out all your premises in his subscript notation. Then you look for the eliminans, the terms that appear twice, once as a subject and once as a predicate. You underscore them. 1 line for the first appearance, 2 lines for the second. Then you look at their subscripts. If one is a 1 and one is a 0, or they're on opposite sides of the proposition, they can cancel out. You strike them through.
You literally just cross them out on the page.
Yes, you physically hack away all the noise, all the intermediate steps, until you can clearly see what's left standing. You're left with just the retenens. It allows you to take this massive, convoluted paragraph of arguments and, in a matter of seconds, reduce it down to its core truth. All A or D.
We have to talk about the examples he uses to teach this stuff, because this is where the author of Alice in Wonderland really shines through. He doesn't just use all A as B, he uses, well, for a start, the sea serpent.
The sea serpent syllogism is a classic. It's a perfect example of his wit being used to teach rigor. The first premise is, that story of yours about your once meeting the sea serpent always sets me off yawning.
Okay. A bit passive-aggressive, but noted.
Premise 2. I never yawn unless when I'm listening to something totally devoid of interest.
So the conclusion has to be,
That story of yours is totally devoid of interest. It is a savage takedown of a boring dinner guest, but it's hidden inside a perfectly valid logic puzzle.
And what about the guinea pig one?
That one's great too. Premise 1. No one who appreciates Beethoven fails to keep silence while the Moonlight Sonata is being played. Premise 2. Guinea pigs are hopelessly ignorant of music.
The conclusion being, I guess, that guinea pigs are not the target audience for a Beethoven concert.
It's absurd, but the logic is sound. And my favorite is probably the famous Grosser puzzle, which is a long sorites involving honest men, sugar, and whiskers.
Right. And what he's doing here with all this whimsy is actually something very important, isn't it? He's forcing you to detach the meaning of the words from the structure of the argument.
That is the key skill he's teaching, the ability to distinguish between truth and validity.
Explain that difference. It's crucial.
A valid argument is one where the conclusion logically follows from the premises. The machine works. The gears mesh correctly. A true argument is one where the premises themselves actually match reality. Carroll loves to give his readers valid arguments that are factually absurd.
Like the one he sets on Mars.
Yes. He posits a world where premise 1 is all chickens are nursery governesses. And premise 2 is all nursery governesses are disciplinarians.
Therefore, the conclusion is all chickens are disciplinarians.
Logically, that is a flawless, 100% valid argument. The conclusion falls perfectly from the premises. Factually, of course, it's utter nonsense. But Carroll wants you to learn to respect the machine of logic, regardless of the raw materials you feed into it.
He wants you to be able to listen to a politician's speech and say, okay, I actually agree with your final conclusion, but the argument you used to get there is a fallacy. It's broken.
Or the opposite. Your logical structure is perfect, but your initial premises are complete lies. It's about diagnosing the error precisely.
It's intellectual self-defense.
It is. He says in the book that the ultimate utility of his game is to give the reader the power to tear to pieces the flimsy arguments found in books, newspapers, and sermons. He was arming the general public with critical thinking tools.
So now looking back on this from, 130 years in the future, what is the lasting legacy of this work? Do professional mathematicians still pull out a Carroll board to solve problems?
Not literally, no. In pure mathematics and philosophy, we've largely standardized on a different form of Boolean algebra notation. But conceptually, His influence is enormous.
How so?
Well, his entire system prefigured the logic gates that run every computer on the planet. The way he handles and, or, and not with his counters and his diagrams is exactly analogous to how a microchip processes information. Red is 1, gray is 0, existence and nullity.
So the author of Alice in Wonderland genuinely helped lay the conceptual groundwork for the iPhone.
In a direct lineage sense, yes. And his theoretical work went even further than the game. In the appendices to the book, he expands his diagram method to handle logical problems with up to 10 different variables.
10 variables. That must be an insane diagram.
It is. He creates this kind of hypercube of logic cells. It has 124 distinct compartments, and he provides a method for navigating it visually. He was pushing the absolute boundaries of what the human mind could visualize and hold steady.
It's just amazing to think that the same mind that wrote Jabberwocky, which is a poem about how grammatical structure can hold together complete nonsense words.
And still create meaning.
That same mind wrote Symbolic Logic, which is about how logical structure can hold together completely nonsense propositions.
It's the exact same obsession viewed through 2 different lenses. He was obsessed with the rules of the game, whether that game was language or mathematics or logic. He understood on a profound level that if the structure is sound, the content can be almost anything.
Which brings us to the part of our deep dive where we take the source material and we push it until it breaks. It's time for thought experiments.
Let's see where Carroll's logic takes us when we take it off the leash.
Okay, a quick disclaimer. The following thought experiments are outlandish but plausible philosophical extrapolations based on the text we've discussed. They are intended for entertainment and educational purposes only. Please do not try to legislate reality at home.
Proceed with extreme caution.
All right. Experiment number 1, the ontological dictator. This one is based directly on Carroll's controversial axiom that all implies existence. Remember, for him, all X or Y asserts that X is a real thing.
Right, the double proposition. It plants a red counter.
So imagine a government, a parliament, a Congress, a dictatorship that passes all of its laws in the form of universal affirmatives. The laws are statements like all citizens are happy, all dinners are nutritious, all work is fulfilling.
Okay, a very optimistic government.
A very optimistic government. But if Carroll's logic is the underlying physics of this particular reality, then the very act of legislating a universal attribute logically forces the existence of the subject of that law.
Ah, I see where you're going with this. So if the government passes a law that says all poor people are fed, does that actually solve poverty?
Well, this is the trap. This is the horrifying unintended consequence. If you pass the law, all poor people are fed, and the word all asserts existence, then you have just passed a law which asserts that poor people exist.
Oh, no.
You've constitutionally mandated the existence of poverty in the very act of trying to solve it.
That backfires spectacularly. By trying to help them with a universal affirmative, you've anchored them into the ontological structure of the state. You've made poverty a permanent, necessary feature of reality.
Exactly. So if this ontological dictator genuinely wants to eliminate poverty, they cannot pass the law. All citizens are wealthy.
Because that would only assert the existence of wealthy citizens. It wouldn't do anything about the poor ones.
To eliminate poverty, the dictator must use the universal negative. The law must be, no citizens are poor.
Because no does not imply existence.
Boom. No creates the vacuum. All creates the matter. A truly effective dictator needs to be a master of their logical quantifiers.
That is a terrifying thought. It turns legislation into a kind of creation engine. It means every time our own governments pass a law beginning with all, they are, in a small way, conjuring a piece of reality into being.
Frightening. Okay, experiment number 2, the universal negative shield. We're in a courtroom. A man is on trial accused of stealing a priceless diamond.
Okay, a classic scenario.
The defense attorney gets up. He doesn't argue the facts of the case. He doesn't say, my client didn't do it. Instead, he argues the logical definition of the crime itself. He points to the statute, which is written as a universal negative. No law-abiding citizen steals diamonds.
A very common sentiment, yes.
The attorney argues, Your Honor, since the state's entire definition of the good citizen with respect to theft relies on a universal negative, and since, according to Carrollian logic, no does not imply existence, this law does not actually assert that a good citizen even exists as a logical category.
There's a bit of a stretch, but let's see where he goes with it.
He then flips it. He argues that the category of guilty should be treated as a null class. He says, the prosecution has defined my client using only negative attributes. They say he is not honest. They say he is not lawful. Since my client is defined only by these negative copulas, you have not asserted his existence.
Your Honor, you cannot sentence my client to prison because, logically speaking, he is a gray counter. He is a nullity.
The prosecution has failed to place a red counter on the board and therefore has no one to convict.
I think he gets held in contempt of court immediately. But in the purely abstract Carrollian court of logic, he might have a point. Can you punish a phantom? If your legal identity is constructed entirely out of things you are not, do you actually exist in the eyes of the law?
A loophole for logicians. All right, experiment number 3, the sorites of infinity. This one's a bit more existential. We talked about the sorites, the long chain argument where the middle terms, the eliminands, get dropped.
Right. A leads to B leads to C. You get rid of B to connect A and C.
Now, imagine history itself, the flow of time, as a single, massive Carrollian sorites. Event A causes event B. Event B causes event C. An infinite chain of causality stretching back to the Big Bang.
Okay, I'm with you.
As we move forward through time, from one moment to the next, we are constantly underscoring and eliminating the past. The intermediate steps are the eliminands. They happen, they cause the next thing, and then they vanish from the active equation.
So the past is the grand eliminand, and the present moment is the retinand, the conclusion.
Exactly. We, right now, are the conclusion of a 13 billion year long argument. But here's the philosophical question. In a Carrollian sorites, when you drop all those middle terms, do you lose vital information?
Well, you lose the context. You lose the bridge. You're left with the final statement, A leads to Z, but you've lost the entire alphabet that got you there.
So is the universe of discourse constantly shrinking? Are we living in a reality that is becoming logically simpler and simpler because with every passing second, we are deleting the complex chain of logic that brought us to this point?
That is a haunting thought. Are we just a conclusion that has forgotten its own premises? And if we are, can we still be considered true, or are we just valid?
That's the one to mull over tonight.
Indeed.
So let's bring it back down to earth for a final thought. Why does any of this matter? Why should a modern listener, with a smartphone and access to AI, care about some Victorian-era games with boxes and counters?
Because we are absolutely drowning in bad arguments. Just open your social media feed, turn on the news. You are bombarded every single second with people using alls that should be sums. You are faced with people who confuse not X with nothing at all. You see people asserting a universal negative and acting like they somehow prove an existence.
We're seeing that flimsiness that he talked about everywhere we look.
It's everywhere. And Carroll gives you a simple, powerful toolkit. He gives you a mental red counter and a mental gray counter. He teaches you to pause when you hear an argument and ask yourself, is this compartment on the board actually empty? Or is this person just telling me they don't like what's in it? It is a call to rigor. It's a demand for precision in your own thinking and in what you accept from others.
And it's also a reminder that thinking can be fun. It can be a game. You can play it with your friends to build stronger ideas, or you can play it against your enemies to dismantle their flawed worldviews.
Ideally, you should be doing both.
I want to leave you, our listener, with one final thought from the text itself. Near the end, Carroll briefly mentions a famous logical paradox, the 5 liars problem.
Ah, yes, a classic.
And in discussing it, he talks about propositions being like phantoms that we can't quite get a hold of, that we can't pounce upon. And he says that if we just debate truth without a system, without a game board, we are merely taking in each other's washing.
A precarious living indeed is how he finishes that thought.
So, as you go about your week, ask yourself, are you washing your own logic? Are you making sure it's clean and sound? Or are you just taking in someone else's dirty laundry?
Something to think about.
Thank you for joining us on Talk Treatises.
Until next time.